I'm Renee Rochelle, the founder and president of One True Match. I'm here to help you find and cultivate the love of your life. For over a decade, I've dedicated my life to the importance, purpose, and dynamic of human relationships. My team and I are disciplined by faith, love, and integrity to help our clients find the quality relationship they've always dreamt of. Each week, I will be sharing the tools and tips I've learned that have rooted my success as a matchmaker with other leaders around the world.
Hello, loves. Welcome back. I am so excited for you guys to be here for a super special edition. Of course, all of my guests are my favorite. Otherwise, I wouldn't have them on, right, to chat. But this particular guest, Pastor Chris Price, is sitting here with me today, and I've been trying to get him on for a while. He is the pastor of the church that we go to, and it is local here to North Florida. Actually, if you are in this area and you want to come visit, I always love having people sit with me and just worship together and obviously hear Chris's incredible messages at River Rock Church. He's been a pastor for almost over 21 years now. And why I wanted to bring him on today is not only, if you listen to the other podcast that we did with Pastor Darren, I love that they have notes with the sermon. So we can all go back and fellowship and have conversations about it. And we were talking actually earlier how I want to kind of start a group even where we can all collect that are all on different relationship levels to just immerse our love in the Lord, as well as just a community to build. So yes. I want to start off by everybody getting to know Chris's incredible story of actually not thinking he was going to be a pastor to where he is today. A little bit about your love journey, yes, right? Because everybody on this podcast is either dating, single, engaged, or, and so it's really important that I have you on, and I am honored that you are here with us.
Well, Renee, it's fantastic, and thank you for having me here. Thank you for being involved in our church, and it's so great to meet all of your friends and some of your clients as well. They're fantastic people, continue to raise the bar of excellence, and just great people to get to know. So thank you for having me on.
Of course, and thank you for loving on them so much. Everybody feels so welcome every time they meet you.
Well, they're wonderful folks. So you're doing a wonderful job here, what you're doing, and in many ways such a ministry to those that are looking for that next step or that next part of life. So that's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you were asking me about, hey, my life story, and we were talking about that kind of before this podcast.
Yes.
And so let me just share a little bit about how even I came along and what happened, what God did in my life to get me to the point where, hey, here we are now. So I grew up so fortunate to be in a great Christian household with parents who loved me, who took me to church. I was in church way before I was even born in the womb. 4 nights a week we were at church just doing all kinds of things. My dad literally had a key to the church. We locked up the church. And so growing up in that environment was always the support that was there all around me. And at an early age, I felt God doing something unique in my life. I mean, I love the Lord. I never really rebelled. I always had a foundation of Scripture and just that environment that I was in. I went off to school, but to a Christian university, and I was so content for so long to have my God in a box, and I literally kept him here. I mean, as long as everything would go well in my life, and as long as he was staying in his place, and I was a good little boy and behaving well and all those things,
life was good.
Life was great, fantastic. It was around 10th grade, though, that I really began feeling like God was doing something in my life to call me into ministry. And I kept saying, absolutely not. The last thing I ever want to do. I made decent grades. I mean, I got scholarships to college, was doing all kinds of wonderful things in life. And I'm like, God, I am too good to be a pastor. I had heard someone tell me in my family, it basically said that pastors are people who don't know what else to do with their lives, so they just become pastors, right? And I have that in the back of my head all the time. Like, for those folks, anybody can be a pastor. You can just jump right in and say, hey, I feel like I'm called by God to be a pastor, and right. Everyone says, hey, good for you. And so I had that in the back of my mind growing up and just thinking, God, there's no way you're calling me. I mean, here's my fun, right? I wanted to be an orthodontist. I thought orthodontists had the job, right? They're never on call. They have middle schoolers that they torture, which is so much fun, right? And my orthodontist would show up driving a Range Rover or Porsche in his reserved parking place. I'm like, that is the perfect job, and it's not that hard, not so stressful. I have no idea what being an orthodontist is like. And for all of you that are out there that are orthodontists, sorry. But this was my thought, right? What could I do that would be easy, that I could earn a decent income, have a happy family, keep God in my box,
Right.
and occasionally maybe even do a mission trip or teach Sunday school on Sundays.
Too easy.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be great. And God kept saying, that's not what I have for you. That's not what I have for you. And I kept telling God, oh, yes, it is. To the point that in college, I had some wonderful people that surrounded me, began to encourage me and say, Chris, there's something unique about you. And we feel like, hey, we affirm that God might be doing something in your life. So I began to make deals with God, Renee. This is where I was, right? I had a professor that called me into his office one day, and he goes, what do you want to do with your life? He became a mentor. He had graduated from Harvard. He had been a part of opening up a Harvard business school in a different country, all kinds of, dean at Wake Forest of the business school. So he called me in his office, and he semi-retired, and said, what are you doing with your life? And I told him, you know what, I feel like God's calling me, but I don't want to be a pastor, because pastors are people that don't know what else to do with their lives, right? So, and he began to challenge me. One day, he picked up the phone in his office, and he randomly picked it up, and he said, Chris, I got an idea. And I'm like, I don't want to be a pastor. Maybe I want to teach. Maybe I want to be a professor, those kind of things. I'll still live out a calling, but it's not being a pastor.
Right.
So he picked up the phone in his office, and he dialed a number, and the other person answers on the other, and he goes, hey, Kathy, I know we haven't talked in 6 months, but I've got this guy in my office that I think would be great at your seminary. And sorry, we'll catch up at another time, but do you mind just to talk to him for like 5 or 10 minutes and tell him why he should come and pursue studying there?
Right.
No idea who Kathy is. Have not a clue. So I take the phone from Kathy. First thing she says is, well, this is really unique that Ed over here doesn't really call unless there's somebody that he really appreciates. And so let me just tell you about who I am. Well, she was the head of the PhD department at Princeton Seminary, which is way off my radar. Would never even thought of a place like that or going there. So had a conversation. I began to have other conversations with other schools and like, hey, God, let's do this PhD thing. I can do my seminary. I can be a part of that, fulfill that calling, and teach others to be pastors or get involved with
Right.
God at a deeper level.
Sure.
So I did, and ended up, I got a full ride on to Princeton. They even paid me some stipend money, got a fellowship to study at the University of Edinburgh through the Rotary Club, just so many great things. And I'm like, God, we got this good partnership going. I love this deal that we have. And God began to say, but I have so much more for you, Chris. And I began to say, I don't think you do. I think this is the life that we want, right? And all in the back of my mind, there's this whole scripture when Jesus said, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? I mean, my whole life I wanted to be a business entrepreneur, wanted to be an orthodontist, wanted to be comfortable with life.
Right.
But that's not what Jesus ever asked of any of us. In fact, he tells us all throughout Scripture, my role in your life is not to bring you comfort in this life. My role is to bring you peace. And out of that peace comes the comfort of who I've created you to be, to live out my calling for your life, not your calling.
Right.
And I'm sitting there with my professor that day, having talked to Kathy, the head of the PhD at Princeton, right? And he told me, he looked square at me in the eye and he said, your God is this big. When are you going to let him out? Like, when are you actually going to let him out of the box to where you say, hey, God, what do you want to do with my life? Instead of what do I want to do with God in my life?
Right.
And that's a huge question for all of us. Got through that point, going through Princeton, finishing up my final year, and have a field ed experience that we all have to do as seminary students. And so my field education experience was at a church in New York City, the Lower East Side of Manhattan, called Graffiti Church. And the pastor was a PhD former professor that felt God calling him to reach the drug addicts and the down and out of the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And so I'm like, okay, well, this is perfect for me. Get ready to begin my day and begin my year there. My start date was September the 16th, 2001. So New York City was in chaos. 9/11 had just happened 5 days before. They ended up pushing my start date another week because I couldn't get into New York City at that point. But I had this whole attitude of, I have so much intelligence, so much smart things, and these people are going to love it because I'll just be telling them about God and Jesus and how we could change their life. And I've got so much to help these people with. And I show up on that first week and realized right when I walked into the church and began to meet these people who literally brought their life with them in a garbage bag to church. Some of them had been hungover from the night before. Some of them reeked because they haven't had a shower in a week. But we gather in the basement of this church, and I realized very quickly, I don't have anything to teach them. They have so much to teach me.
Yeah.
And it was that whole year in the aftermath of 9/11, outpouring of the world onto New York City. We would get Beanie Babies, and we would get all these little things, that to give out to people. Gloves, coats, jackets, whatever. So much stuff that we didn't even know what to do with. But we began to distribute that to some of our homeless people in the church.
Yeah.
Who then would take them to other homeless friends,
Oh.
give away their stuff, and then come back the next week with no gloves and no coats. And we're like, well, what happened? And well, this person needed it more than I did. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So yeah, we would try to find them something else, and they'd come back the next week. Same thing would continually happen. And I'm like, God, what are you doing? Here are people who have nothing, but they're giving away all that they have for the sake of love for others, because that's what you've called us to do. And I remember sitting there week after week with these people as I'm supposed to be teaching them, learning so much about who God really is. And God began to show me, yeah, you've got me in this box. What are you doing, Chris? And so my box began to disintegrate, to understand how God uses us in a relationship with him, but also open us to understand the value that comes in putting others first.
Right.
And understanding God's got a calling and a movement for each and every one of us. I knew then I was called to be a pastor. I threw away that whole idea of a PhD and being a professor where maybe 5 or 6 students would actually have to read my dissertation, but whatever, right?
And how old are you at this point?
I'm 22, 23,
okay. All
right?
Gotcha. For my younger listeners
Absolutely.
out there, right? Or parents that have younger children, right? Thinking
Bingo.
about all these phases.
So 22, 23 years old, trying to figure out life, right? Graduated seminary at 24. And through this process, realizing it is not about my social status. It is not about how much income I'm going to make. It's not about how important I'm going to be. It's about how much influence will God allow me to have in the life of other people. And that has changed my whole perspective of ministry. Through my life too, I would be bad if I didn't tell you the story too of just graduated from high school. I was 18 years old. I was a youth minister for the summer at a small little church on the other side of town, and that was a whole story in itself of how I got hired there. But there are students in that youth ministry. There are about 20-25 kids that were a year or two younger than me, and I was their youth minister. But one Sunday in that summer, I'm driving to church on the other side of town, and I have my cassette tape that gets stuck in the ejector, right? And I couldn't get it out coming into the church. As a result of playing with that, being 18 years old, I come off the interstate and I run through a stop sign at the end of the exit ramp. I hit an elderly woman in her car, right? I hit it, ended up totaling her car, messing up my car. And all through that, this is just part of life. These things happen. I'm 18, of course, insurance, all that stuff. My parents not super happy, but God continued to say.
Nobody died.
Nobody died.
Right,
we're
not
fine.
Tragic.
Except a year and a half later, I get a lawsuit. And I'm being sued for almost $1 million. A lot of it was loss of enjoyment of future life. A lot of it was supposedly got re-injured and some other things. And so, whole long story. I go through this lawsuit all throughout my college experience. When God's trying to get my attention, he's yelling at me, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? There's $1 million lawsuit hanging over my shoulder during my college days. And the problem is I had nothing, right? But the car that I was driving was in my parents' name, which means that all of their assets that they'd worked so hard throughout their life was now fair game.
For that, yeah.
Our insurance policy went to $100,000, so anything over that was going to be out of our pocket. And again, God used that, as hard as it was, to shape me and to continue to speak into me, to discipline me, to quit this thinking of God in a box and to quit this thinking of hey, it's all about the social climb,
Right.
to understanding that, hey, I've got it figured out, Chris. Just trust me through this. And I think that's my overarching theme, Renee, is that throughout my whole life, just realizing I don't have to have it all figured out. I don't have to keep pursuing stuff so hard and trying to make things fit that I'm manipulating situations. God says, just breathe, just relax, turn your burden over to me. Let me guide your life, and I will show
Trust
you
me, right?
immeasurably more than you could ever even imagine. And so that in essence gets us to that point of coming to New York City, meeting those homeless, drug addicted type people, and realizing God has so much in store for all of us if we'll just take the time to listen, just take the time to trust.
It's so true. And
Yes.
I love that that's your journey because, like you said, you fought it to then be in it. And
Right.
that's one of the topics I definitely am excited to share with our audience.
Yes.
Why I wanted to also bring you on and talk about. But so I want to dive into a little bit too about your journey,
Yes.
obviously meeting your lovely
Yes.
wife, because, a lot of people out here are also, either still looking for that special person and, lose hope.
That's it.
And I love in one of your sermons, you were talking about kind of your journey again,
That's it.
but leading to God this time in every asset of it. And we're with our prayer words and everything else, we always tell everybody sometimes when it takes a little bit longer, we've got to pray harder, right?
That's
we've got
it.
to pray with more intention.
and be at the point when you're ready for that person to come into your
Yes.
life. So that's really part of my story, and you've asked me to share that, and it's a great one, because all throughout college, my roommate and I, we were roommates for 3 years.
Okay.
And we would always yell out at random times, top 5. And whenever we would yell that out, we had to name out the top 5 girls we were interested in. And it would be our job as wingmen, right? To help set up situations where we would have conversations or
Like a
party
matchmaker.
dates. Matchmaker. Absolutely. That's what we were doing. And so we would yell out top 5, and sometimes it got awkward because my top 5 would have a girl that would be in his top 5. But anyway, so my whole life was in college was, hey, how can we manipulate situations to get to know different girls that we thought we would be interested in, right? Well, senior year, he gets a girlfriend. She's the homecoming queen. They end up getting married. So I lose my wingman, right? And I get out of college where I went to a school. One of the reasons I went there was because it was about 70% female and 30% male. I'm like,
Right.
how can you get out of here without a
Can you
wife,
be
right?
wrong, right? Go wrong.
Nothing. And so I go off to seminary where that whole male-female ratio switches, and I'm looking at God and I'm like, what do you have for me? What is out there? And who is it, Lord? Is it anybody? And so after my first year of seminary, I then went and took my second year in Scotland. And I'm praying the whole time, like, Lord, I don't, what is it? Finished my first year of seminary. I'm a summer camp counselor, camp pastor for youth camps. And I get to the end of that, beginning of that summer, and I'm about to go and work with students all during that summer, high school students. And I have it in my prayer journal. Lord, for the first time in my life, I am done trying to make a relationship. Lord, if you want me to be single for the rest of my life, for the first time, I'm content with that.
Yeah.
That if that's your will, and if that's what you think is best for me, then let it be. And help me to be okay with that, and help me to see the bigger picture of what you're doing in my life to better me for whatever situation comes my way. Well, Renee, when I prayed that, and I still have it in my journal, this weight just was lifted off.
I so know what you're talking about when you finally surrender
Surrender
and
is
say
the
that
word.
love that I have for you is better and more powerful than any other love I'll have.
That's it.
That's when things start moving.
It was one more piece of that God in a box,
Yes.
letting God work and letting me trust him.
Yeah.
And he's telling me, you can trust me in this. Here's the crazy thing. I show up for that first day of camp counselor meetings, right? We're planning and we're getting ready for the students that are coming. And lo and behold, this girl named Christy comes walking into the door. She's the last counselor to show up, wearing overalls and a white little t-shirt. And I had just prayed this prayer a day or two before, have it written down, like, I'm content, I'm happy. She walks in, drops her bags and says, hey, I'm Christy. And I'm like, who is this girl, right? I got so nervous, I asked her how she was doing like 2 times in a matter of 30 seconds. She's like, I just answered that, but okay, yeah, I'm doing fine. And so it was that instant kind of, I don't know what to do here, right? And as awkward as I am, it was like awkward times 3. And so through that summer, began to get to know her, really began to fall in love, I think, even though we weren't supposed to date or have an exclusive relationship. We kind of broke that rule, and had some great conversations and all that, to the point that, you know what, 3 years later, ended up marrying that girl.
No,
and the fun part is her initials, her name is the same as my name. She's Christiane. I'm Christopher Andrew. Just put the masculine and female on there. Her maiden name was an M, and my name is Price. And so when you put our initials together, it spells C-A-M-P, camp.
There we go.
And that's where
That's where you met. See?
I'm like, I need all of these neon lights and signs from God. Like, this is the one.
God is the best choreographic.
So
forever.
Absolutely. So Renee, my encouragement to everyone would be, hey, be content right now with who God has you. Work on being who he's called you to be. Trust him that he knows better than any of us regarding timing and, hey, who that person's going to be. And instead of trying to manipulate so many situations and trying to make things happen,
negotiate with God.
Negotiate with God. Trust him. Take God out of the box and say, God, I'm going to give you free reign in everything, including my relationships. And then when you're ready, I feel like there's this component that, hey, God wants to know, are we really going to keep him first? Even when someone else comes to our life, are they going to take over that top spot? Is pursuing in that chase and that dating game and then the whole marriage, does that take over where he rightfully belongs?
Right.
And I think he wants to prepare us for that.
Absolutely. And it's also, finding somebody that is in that same place and readiness. And, with a lot of our clients, we go through this needs and wants analysis, and we use that as a prayerful tool. And I'm like, it can't be this beautiful box that you're, talking about that's all flowers and roses and like perfection, right? And so it's so important that we're also intentionally praying for the things that matter most, not only for, today, but also for the future in a relationship with somebody.
And the crazy thing is when you find that right person, God's doing something in their life as well.
Yes.
So in Christy's life, before we had met, she had been engaged before, which was a huge thing for me. Wonderful guy, Christian man, going into the Air Force, graduated a year or two ahead of her, waiting for her. And during their engagement, began to have some hard conversations to say, you know what, I'm not sure. And Christy really began to feel like, you know what, this guy is really good, but he might not be the best for me.
Right.
That it's not God's best, but could it work? Maybe.
Yeah.
And began to struggle with God on her own, to the point that she broke off that engagement. They still remained friends and tried to date some more, but then realized, you know what, this just isn't right. And both of them came to that point. And so now here's Christy with the understanding of, you know what, God's got something else for me, and I'm trusting him along this journey, doing something really hard. Or even her family was like, what are you doing? He's a good guy. But realizing that maybe there's something even better. And she was okay with that. She took the criticism, realizing that I'm trusting God with this, not myself.
Right.
And then lo and behold, here we are. I'm praying to be content with singleness. She's praying to be content with who God's made her to be outside of this relationship. And then the timing was right there for the both of us.
Right.
And God
he knew you were both finally ready. And that's the biggest thing we talk about all the time on tips and things we give on relationship advice is you have to truly be ready.
Yes.
And actually know you're ready.
Bingo. And be the best version of yourself that God's created you to be.
Absolutely.
And allowing him free reign. And so Renee.
And how many years married now?
Oh my goodness, we're now at 21 years. We just celebrated
21.
last week. 21.
Congratulations.
We're adults.
We're
adults in the relationship.
And you have how many children?
3 children.
3 children, and they're the ages of?
One's in 11th grade, and then my 2 daughters, 9th grade and 5th grade.
All right.
So it is a busy, fun, bumbling household.
And when do you two have or find time to do your date nights?
Wonderful question. We try to squeeze in whatever we can in between dance practices and soccer and between music lessons that all of our kids are involved in. But having that intentional time, that's something we will always be working on.
Right. And it never stops.
Never stops.
Then like we always talk about even then after they go off and then it's back to just the two of you, right? It's like you have to evolve in the seasons, but you have to have that solid foundation, which clearly you guys built from the beginning.
That's it. And never losing sight of, hey, the intimacy that we have, not just in a physical relationship, right, but in the emotional and even in the mental and the understanding of one another, that hey, we've got to be on the same page no matter where we are.
Right.
And so working on that is one of the blessings, I think, that both of us understand that.
Sure.
How easy it is to just be ships in the night, just passing by each other and saying, hey, it's great to have you as a roommate.
Yeah.
That's not what marriage was intended to be.
No.
In relationships. It's a sharing of life, and that's where
So you two, I'm sure, are different in so many ways, right? Opposite sex typically
Absolutely.
are, and we attract like-minded people, but then also we're attracted to something that's so different than us.
Yes.
And I'm
Oh my goodness.
This is not a rehearsed question.
No.
So we have no idea what you're going to answer by me
That's-
asking this question.
That's it.
But what is it that you both like draw into each other as a common ground? Obviously your faith.
Sure.
But that just really keeps you guys solid.
So that's the foundation. You nailed it. Faith is it. That's the number one thing in our life, and we both recognize that. And I tell you, when Jesus is number one, everything else begins to fall into place.
Right.
But on that foundation, here's the deal. On the Myers-Briggs, I was a 99% extrovert. My wife is way on the introvert side.
Okay.
So whenever we go into just situations where
Socials.
there's social situations all around, I want to make sure I meet everybody within the first 3 or 4 minutes that I'm there. Like I will work the crowd. I will try to meet everyone. I'll try to remember everybody's names, do all that. While I leave my wife behind, which is something that early in our marriage, she was like, why did you leave me? And I'm like, well, why didn't you come with me? Right? Why didn't you just, and for her, having 1 or 2 great conversations for the whole evening is fantastic. For me, I got to know everybody in the room. So that was one of the first things that we learned. We had to recognize that, hey, how do we mold this and work on this? Other things though is, man, she is so great at listening, and I do really well at talking. So we've got this whole understanding too, where we even have some code words or some signals that, hey, let's work this out better. Had a friend that said, your wife is the best listener that I have ever had a relationship with or have known in my life. And I'm like, she's amazing at that.
So
And
balancing each other out
balancing
in
each
different
other.
ways, right? Is
That's
what
it.
also makes you guys woven so beautifully
Gel.
together. So
That's it.
I love that.
Yep.
I love that.
And of course, there are different perspectives on financing and different perspectives on raising kids. But that's where communication is what overarches every single thing in a relationship.
Yeah.
And for us, you got to work at it. It doesn't come easy per se.
Right. And I always say it's the stepping stones to the foundation that grows is to really have, a lot of our interview questions are premarital questions, right?
Mhm.
Because it's like, it's good to know that all up front, how people would respond, because when you're out there dating on your own, you're just going after somebody that's profile that looks great, that's attractive, and you have that lust. But
That's
right,
it.
we haven't asked all the big things that actually matter. And sometimes people sway their answers after they meet that person. And it's like,
Yes.
I'll either change them or I can change this about me. And they're not authentically being who God's designed them to be.
And that's when they're trying to manipulate the situation, Renee. And
Right.
whenever you try to manipulate who you are or who someone else is, the minute you're missing the authenticity.
It's so true.
And that leads to hard times later, because at some point you're going to realize the authentic person that either you are, the other person is, and it's not who you expected them to be. So working that out at the beginning and trusting God enough to say, you've got this figured out way before I ever have. So allow me just to be the person you've created me to be, and nothing else, nothing less, but let's keep moving beyond that.
Which is so true, and
Yes.
very valuable advice to all of our listeners
Absolutely.
out there. And I definitely want to, we're going to continue this on. We're probably going to do this in 2 series.
Mhm.
But I want to talk about something. Of course, all of Chris's sermons are amazing. So if you're somebody that's looking for a church, join us. If you're not local, go on the River Rock website. We'll put that all up there in our show notes, obviously. But one of the sermons you more recently did, or maybe it's not as recent. 'Cause
Yeah.
every Sunday, obviously, he's doing amazing sermons. But it was about the race is worth it.
Absolutely.
And so what I want to do, obviously, is dive more into detail, because every time I walk away so not inspired, right? Because all of us are from our
Right.
pastors that we listen to, but
Sure.
also educated to want to learn for a thirst
Right.
of more of what the Bible's telling us and what God is trying to share with us. So we're going to dive into that. on another episode, but I'm so glad that at least our audience has gotten to hear your story, get to know you a little bit more, because I want to have you on just more frequently, obviously, and just conversation, couch talk, talks, and in just being our biggest prayer warrior for a lot of our clients as well, that is so important to remember that there are other people out there that are in your camp of love and encouragement and supporting, and that when if you're in a difficult relationship, you're trying to figure it out, you can't do it alone.
That's it.
So have that force around you of community that's supportive. Or if you're single, it's lonely, right, at times too. So anyways, we hope that you have enjoyed this episode of getting to know Pastor Chris Moore, and we will definitely put more details in. Send us a message, send us any questions, join me and my family of friends and other people, and we hope you have a blessed day.
It's been another great talk on this episode of One True Talks by Renee Rochelle. I look forward to our next chat. Please write in your questions and comments so I can be sure to talk about whatever it is you want to discuss in our next upcoming episode. Lots of love. God bless. XOXO.